So now what we're going to do is we're going to transition to the pattern stamp tool. So I'm going to undo the changes that I made to the image by hitting Control-Z. If you're using an older version of Photoshop, it'll be step backwards, Alt-Control-Z. And we worked with the clone stamp in the previous exercise. Now we're going to look at the pattern stamp tool. And the idea with the pattern stamp tool is that I can infuse a pattern into my artwork. Now, let's go up and look at the pattern. So you'll see that there's a smattering of different patterns that I can open and edit. And I can choose a pattern, and then I can paint with that pattern and just paint that right into the surface of the document. So if I do something like that, it's relatively unconvincing. But what I can do, I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to adjust the opacity. I'll set that to about 20%, and I'll set the flow to about 50%. And then when I can paint into the surface with that pattern, and now it starts to look relatively convincing. So what I can do is I can use this to repair any kind of surface or add a dimensional element to the surface by painting a pattern into that surface area. And that clone stamp tool, the pattern stamp tool, is very useful for that. Now, there are a number of patterns up here, but really whenever you see a box and it's got a bunch of tools in it like that, really what Photoshop is expecting you to do is to create your own element, your own brushes, your own layer styles, your own patterns, your own, in this case, a pattern. So we're going to create a pattern. So I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to drag a rectangle over the letter A. And I'm going to turn this into a pattern by going up to Edit. I go down to Define Pattern. And then I give the pattern a unique name. I'm going to call it Pattern A and click OK. And I have successfully created a pattern. Now I'm going to turn off the selection. Remember, there's 3 different ways to turn off a selection. Control-D is one way to turn off a selection. Another way to turn off a selection is to go to Select and choose Deselect. And the third way is to take any selection tool and click outside of the canvas, and that will turn off your selection. So those are 3 good methods for turning off a selection. It's important to know how to turn on a selection. It's also important to know how to turn off a selection. Also, remember that lots of times what happens with beginners is that they lose a selection. Remember that if I accidentally turn off a selection, I can go back up to Select and I can choose Reselect, and that will drop the selection back down on the screen. Or if I go up to Edit and choose Undo Deselect, that will also drop the selection back down on the screen. So lots of times while you're working, you might think that you've lost a selection, but really most of the time you can go back and recollect that. Now, I've created a pattern. I'm going to go to my pattern stamp tool, and I go into that little menu, and I should see the pattern that I created. There it is. I select it, and now I can paint with that pattern into the document. Now the cool thing is that once I've loaded that pattern, I can find it in a number of different places. If I go under Edit and I go to Fill and I go to Pattern, I can find the pattern in there. And also if I go to my layer styles, I can find the pattern inside of one of my layer styles. So I can reuse that pattern in a number of different places. We're going to stop here, come back, and do another tutorial in just a sec.